So here we go. We're going to solve simple equations. Solving simple equations. I don't want red. Do you remember the difference between an equation and an expression? What do you got for me? Yep.
An equation has an equal sign and an expression has.
Perfect. An equation's got an equal sign. This has got an equal sign. An expression has no equal sign. So an equation is something like x minus 8 equals 17, whereas an expression would just be the x minus 8 part. Just a little math lingo for you. So the first thing we're going to do is solve by adding and subtracting. And my first example gives me x minus 3 equals negative 5. What am I going to do first there? What's my only option? I got to get rid of that minus 3, right? So in order to get rid of that minus 3, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to add 3. When I add 3 on this side, I've got to add 3 on the other side. When I do that, my 3's cancel. I did that on purpose. The big fancy word for that is I used inverse operations. And when I do that, I get x equals negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. So I always like to remind myself, because sometimes I think it gets tricky when you're trying to decide if you're going to do the same sign or the opposite sign. If you're combining like terms, we're using the same sign, but anytime I'm going to the opposite side, or if I'm going to the opposite side of the equal sign, I want to use the opposite sign. So I've added 3 because I was moving to the other side of the equal sign. What if I spice it up a notch and give you decimals? Or if I say 0.9 equals y plus 2.8. First thing I'm going to look at is what's next to the y that I need to get rid of. I notice that I've got a 2.8 added to my y, so I want to get rid of this 2.8. And I'm going to do whatever the opposite is, so since it's adding, I'm going to subtract. And I'm also going to subtract it to the other side. Now my 2.8s are gone. 0.9 minus 2.8 is negative 1.9, which equals y. And I'm all done. What do you think? Not too bad? You've seen this before, right? Why don't you try do n plus 3 equals -7 and -6.5 equals P plus 3.9. Yes. So you're going to always pick the one that's next to the variable. So you always put the variable that's also you want to subtract this. Man, you guys are crushing. What do I have to do on that first one? How do I get rid of a plus 3? Minus 3, right? So I subtract 3, and now my n is all by itself. And when I do -7 minus -3, I get -10. And then I was a little bit tricky and gave you some decimals over there. So I see that the P is next to a plus 3.9, so I know I want to get rid of this 3.9. And since it's adding, my opposite is subtracting. So I'm going to subtract 3.9 over here. And when I subtract 3.9, -6.5 minus 3.9 gives me -10.4 equals P. Just remember, if my signs are the same, it's really like I'm adding them together and then just taking that negative sign that's already there. I thought I was going to be able to stump you with the decimals, but it didn't slow you guys down. We're going to get even fancier. Let's use some multiplying and dividing. So my first example for multiplying and dividing is the one that's always the scariest looking, where it's -n divided by 5 equals -3. Anytime we see a fraction, we kind of always get a little freaked out, right? But fraction just means division. So now what's the opposite of division? Multiplication, right? So in order for me to get rid of that divided by 5, all I'm going to do is multiply by 5 on both sides. So when I multiply by 5, that gets rid of my denominator. So now I just have a negative, and equals -3 times 5 is -15. And then in order to get rid of that negative sign, come back. In order for me to get rid of that negative sign, I've got to divide by a -1. Remember that trick? Because it's really like I have a 1 here, but us mathematicians, we Don't always write that 1 because we like to write as few numbers as possible. So since I have a -1 in front of my n, in order to get rid of it, I got to divide by a -1, which cancels this out. And then gives me n equals a negative divided by a negative, cancels my negatives out, and 15 divided by 1 is just 15. What if I gave you 1.3z equals 5.2? So now this is a multiplying one because that 1.3 and the z are side by side. So if I want to undo multiplication, my opposite of multiplication is division, right? So I'm going to divide by 1.3, and divide by 1.3. Which gives me z is equal to, if I put 5.2 divided by 1.3 in my calculator, I get 4. So now you try y divided by 3 equals -6, and 0.05 w equals 1.4. What do I do for that first one? How do I get rid of that divided by 3? Times by 3, right? So if I times by 3, I've got to do that on both sides. So now I just have a y equals -6 times 3 gives me one negative, gives me a negative. 6 times 3 is 18. Then my second one has 0.05 w equals 1.4. So in order to get rid of that 0.05, that's multiplying the w, my opposite of multiplying is divide. So I divide both sides. W equals, and 1.4 divided by 0.05. When I put that in my calculator, I get 28. All right, so since you are so easily crushing this, what if I mix it together? Easy. If I mix it together and give you a two-step equation, so now we're going to have to either add and subtract or multiply and divide. We're going to have to do both things in order to get to the end. So for example, 3x plus 1 equals 10. So now I have two things next to my x. I have that 3 next to my x, and I have that plus 1. I'm always going to get rid of the things that are farthest away from the x first. So since the 3 is literally touching the x, I want to get rid of that 1 first. I want to move that 1 to the other side since it's a little bit farther away from the x. So if I have a plus 1, how do I get rid of plus 1? Minus 1, right? Subtract 1. Subtract 1 on both sides, which will get rid of this one, and ends up giving me 3x equals 10 minus 1 is 9. And then how do I get rid of that 3? Divide. Divide 3 on both sides. Perfect. And then I divide 3 on both sides. I end up with x equals 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. If you end up getting a fraction as your answer, you can leave it as a fraction, or you can put it in your calculator and turn it into a decimal. Totally up to you how you want to do that, okay? What if I gave you something that looks like this? N divided by 5 minus 2 equals 3. So now same thing. I want to get rid of the thing that's farther away from the n first. So the 3 is the farthest, right? It's already on the other side of the equal sign. So once it's on the other side of the equal sign, we don't have to worry about it. We want to get rid of the stuff that's on the same side of the equal sign. So we've got to get rid of that negative 2, and we've got to get rid of that 5. Since the 5 is dividing by the end, it's kind of like it's touching. It's kind of like acting the same way that 3 was before. So I want to get rid of that minus 2 first. I got to move that minus 2 to the other side. So I'm going to add 2 on both sides. I got to get rid of this 2. The opposite of minus 2 is plus 2, right? So I'm going to add 2 on both sides. Which is going to leave me with n divided by 5 equals 3 plus 2 is 5. And now I have to get rid of that divided by n. That n divided by 5. So in order to get rid of it divided by 5, the opposite of division is multiplication. So multiply on both sides. Just going to cancel that 5 out. And leave me with n equals 5 times 5 is 25.